Well, hi everyone. My name is Steve Boys. I'm the head of EMEA at Cision, and welcome to our final keynote session at CommsCon 21. We are delighted to be joined by the wonderful Barbara Bates, the CEO of Hotwire, which was recently named the Global Technology Agency of the Year. And Barbara will be sharing some of her insights on one of the key themes and challenges for PR and communications leads, where marketing and comms meet and diverge. For those of you who've been with us all day, I'm very impressed with your stamina, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome to the main event. And we do encourage all of our audiences to get interactive and submit your questions in the Q&A panel on the left-hand side for laptop users, and I think on the right if you're using an iPad. And we're certainly going to leave, it's a 45-minute session, but we're certainly going to leave as much time as we can at the end to answer as many questions as we have, so get them in. For many, Barbara needs little introduction. She's spent over 25 years in the tech PR industry and marketing as well, spending most of her career in Silicon Valley. She's an award-winning leader. Barbara is known for pushing the boundaries of strategic communications, championing innovation in the industry. And she's also known to be true to her red-headed roots, not shy of controversy or taking action or telling it as it is. Looking forward to this session, and with that, I will hand you over to Barbara.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here. I'm actually happy to dig into this topic because it seems to be coming up more and more. In fact, when I talked to my staff about what I should include in this presentation, they were incredibly intrigued, mostly because it is a pain point for many of them. So, and before you think that I am too biased towards PR and comms, because I've been doing it for the last 30 years, let me tell you a little bit about my background. I actually started out in my corporate career in marketing. Based in Silicon Valley, I worked in-house at a tech startup running their marketing, and then to a large health tech enterprise also running their marketing. And then my first agency stint, I actually ran the advertising side of advertising and PR agency. I would say I probably worked with hundreds and hundreds, maybe even 1,000 CMOs in my role in the PR world for the last 30 years. So I think I have a slight bias maybe towards comms, but I do definitely understand the challenges and role of marketing. If we were all sitting in a conference venue right now, I'd ask you to raise your hand if your parents still don't know what you do, if you're in PR and marketing and they still have no idea what you do. I would imagine that most hands would be raised because it's a constant sort of joke, inside joke within our industry. So we get a lot of questions about what's the difference between marketing and communication. So I wanted to start with really just the definition, kind of a standard definition between the two. There are many definitions, so you might have your own spin on this, but basically most people see public relations and comms, and I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably today, but is basically the maintenance of a favorable image by a company, an organization, in some cases a personality or a famous person. Marketing, on the other hand, is about promoting and selling products or services, including market research and advertising. Again, this isn't fast and holds true for everybody, but for the most part. Another way of looking at it is that marketing focuses on who to target and how to deliver value that will attract customers, where communications focuses on where to reach these people with what message and when to target them. So traditional way of thinking of marketing is marketing supports sales and advertising. PR supports the larger brand and handles press. It's pretty outdated because we know that both of those disciplines do way more than that. One of the drivers of the overlap between marketing communications has been the role that social media has played. So social media has been around for a while, so this is actually not a new conflict. I think the other thing that's driving more and more overlap and confusion between the roles of marketing and communications is the focus on brand and purpose-driven brands. I think most people realize that you can't market without doing some PR, and you can't do PR without some marketing. So selling products to people who love your brand involves both. And so there's definitely a role for coexistence here. So just talk about the state of the union between marketing and comms. I would say, in my opinion, it's tenuous at best, mostly because there's a lack of defined roles. There's a lack of understanding the value that each play. And I would say there's probably less of an understanding of the value that comms and PR play. And I'm going to talk about this a couple of times. This is obviously still the issue of the PR and comms industry, that we haven't done a good enough job nailing down the specifics about the real value that we deliver to brands. And so oftentimes people just understand marketing a little bit better than they do PR. I should mention here that, size does matter when we talk about comms and marketing in an organization. I have experience working with startups all the way up to Fortune 10 companies. Startups don't have a head of marketing and a head of comms. It's absolutely much more of a combined role. But as the organization gets larger, there's definitely a bifurcation between comms and marketing. And so I'm speaking mostly to mid-sized and large enterprises where they have a CMO or a CCO. One of the things that we see in this conflict is what I like to call the tug of war. You can see all the disciplines that marketing and communications organizations do to support the brand without clear definition of roles and responsibilities. And some of the things that I think cause confusion, which I'll talk about in a minute, oftentimes there's this feeling of a tug of war of each trying to do a little bit of a land grab, especially around things that maybe are blurred lines. Some of the digital work, social media, obviously. I would say internal communications is an area where there seems to be some blurring of lines, influencer marketing, those types of things. One thing that we have learned is that some companies get this right, and that when they do, coexistence is bliss. And basically, it's when public relations or comms and marketing have an equal seat at the table. Both of them realize they are in service of the brand. And there are lots of examples of this. Unfortunately, I think there are more examples of where organizations are actually siloed. A silo mentality is the unwillingness to share information. Your processes and sort of resources are not shared. Silos oftentimes start for political reasons. But that also, I believe that it has a lot to do with really just not really understanding what each discipline does. So most people will say to break down those silos, they're encouraged to share information, share resources, and so forth. And again, I'll talk about this in a minute about how to maybe get through some of these challenges that silos create. I would say, more often than not, this is the rule, not the exception, that structural conflicts and lack of clarity and sometimes politics plays a role. The outcome and the impact oftentimes is the duplication and disconnection, which means you're spending more money than you need to, and you're not getting the real return on investment. I'll go back to the coexistence is bliss mantra, which is, I read something a number of years ago by a writer at Salesforce that talked about this particular issue and how coexistence can actually work. And the 3 C's were something that were played up, and I'm basically stealing what they said because I think it's very true. Cooperation, communication, and collaboration. And we do work with companies that actually get this right and understand that working together, produces better results. So I'd see the reason why this works and how they make this work, this cooperation and collaboration work, is when there's a shared vision, starting at the top when they both are supporting the same vision of the company. There's shared processes, there's shared resources, and shared metrics. And I think the shared metrics is something that isn't often thought about. There are actually some companies that are starting to look at altering employee comp models so that it rewards progress towards shared goals, which I think, a lot of organizations, it would take them quite a while to get to. This is a structure we often see where comms reports to marketing. And personally, I see a lot of problems with this structure, mainly because the priorities are different for communications and for marketing. We talked a little bit about that up front. It's also common for CMOs or people who have come from marketing that they're not that knowledgeable or skilled about PR and communications. And again, I think that goes back to our industry not doing a great job of really articulating the value that we deliver. And the end result is that we oftentimes lack visibility in the C-suite. So we should take it on the chin that this is our fault that this is the case. And so there is still some work to be done there. I think this is very common. We see it quite a bit. This idea of, we've talked about integrated for a very long time. And really, when you think about it, integrated is the combination of marketing and communications. That's basically what it is. I'm not going to go into all the details here. These are all disciplines that marketing and comms organizations should do or need to do to support the brand. And when they work together, that's when the magic happens. So I'm going to talk about a couple examples where the magic doesn't happen. Just 2 examples. These are common situations. I'm going to draw on very specific examples. Won't be naming names, but it'll give you, I'm sure you can relate to a number of these situations. So this first example is a mid-sized global enterprise. And they are working on the biggest campaign of the year. And it's where most of the budget for both marketing and comms will go for the year. The issue is that because comms reports to marketing, oftentimes the most senior gatherings do not include a comms or PR person. It's represented by a marketing person. The biggest issue with this is that there's lack of transparency and shared information. If you're in comms and PR, the best tool that you can have is access to information. That's when professionals can do their best job. Oftentimes when PR reports to marketing, they don't get access to that information. And because there's a lack of understanding from marketing as to what PR needs, oftentimes there's a disconnect. This exact case that I'm talking about, this big campaign was launching. Marketing was off doing its thing. It had its programs and messages and so forth. PR was using the information that they had and went off and did their thing, and they were working with the media and social channels and so forth. When one of the account leads from our team gets on the train in London to head into work and sees all these out-of-home ads that are plastered all over public transportation, and had no idea this was happening, had slightly different messages and themes that PR was going out with. And the issue there is just a lost opportunity. When 1 + 1 = 3 means that your programs, both your marketing and your PR programs, are more successful, that's a motivation for these 2 organizations to work more closely together. The second sort of dysfunctional situation I'll talk about is when politics drives competing marketing messages. I could be politically correct and not ever mention the issue of politics coming into place, but that would not be realistic. The fact is, we're human beings, and sometimes politics do play a part. I'd say the first example I just talked to you about is really driven mostly by a lack of understanding of what each other does. This one is really driven specifically by politics. And a lot of times that attitude comes from the top down. And so it's maybe sometimes hard to solve that problem, but I think there are ways to get through those issues. So what both of these disciplines have in common, and this is now we're sort of getting to how do we solve some of these issues, is that ultimately it's people who buy products and people who care about the brand that they're buying from. So if both marketing and communications can focus at the people that they're trying to impact, communicate to, motivate, they already have a shared goal in mind. Marketing would target the audience selection, and they would create that value proposition, the competitive distinction. The communications that really sort of then takes that, develops the messages, the stories, how to reach the people that they need to impact, and really drive them through the upper elements of the funnel. For PR people to say that they are not responsible for selling product is just BS. The fact is, the only reason why we exist is because we help our clients sell things. We help them sell things. The communications team helps them sell things by helping build strong, sustainable, responsible, positive brands. Marketing helps by identifying a need in the marketplace and creating products that solve those problems. What really happens in many cases is that those products are the things that end up being at the center of what both comms and marketing focus on. And the problem here is that if marketing, click happy, oh, I apologize. Click happy here. With comms being subservient to marketing because they're waiting to get what to communicate and what assets to use, they're basically seen as the people who are just broadcasting, right? And I think communications can add a lot more value than just that. To create harmony between these two is really when you, from the very top, you talk about aligning on the audience and you put that target audience in the center of your goals and what you're trying to accomplish. By doing this, both groups need each other to be successful. This has been crystal clear in the last 10 months. Of course, we've been talking about brand and the value of a purpose-driven brand and how more important that is to consumers and buyers all the time. Not just consumers of consumer goods, but business buyers make decisions around how much they relate and respect a brand. You can't separate the two anymore. People buy products because they solve problems that they have, but they will choose to buy those products from a brand that they respect. And this is really at the nut of what why these two organizations should work more closely together. Brand is really what it's all about. And this is a different way to think, and a very simple way to think, that sales and market share and reputation and valuation are the things that actually build brands, support brand, build value in a brand. And if marketing is responsible for sales and market share, and comms is responsible for reputation and valuation, you can see how working together, they help each other out. This rising importance of brand I just spoke about. I have a very good friend who has for many years helped companies put an actual financial value on their brand. And they do that as a way to help the C-suite understand how important brand is and why they should be budgeting and spending money on the areas of brand. This is a little bit of the methodology that they look at and why more and more brand is becoming important. Research shows that it is one of the primary indicators of a company's future value. We've all seen, and in fact, almost on a daily basis, we can see the impact of communications crisis on brands, probably in the last 4 years between the political situations in many countries, as well as some of the major issues around DEI, Black Lives Matter, immigration issues, most recently COVID, and so forth. Brand has become more and more important, and the C-suite talks about this a lot more, basically because they understand that it comes directly to the bottom line. And in fact, my friend Edgar talks about a strong and valuable brand now being the cost of entry to be a member of the S&P 500. So there is some real dollars behind why these two organizations should come together to to build a strong brand for a company. So I've talked about a lot of things that what doesn't work, what causes problems, and so forth. Here's what a great union looks like. So first and foremost, equal seats at the table. Whether it's a chief communications officer or head of communications or VP of public relations, your most senior communications person and your most senior CMO should have an equal seat at the table. And they should have shared KPIs. This is where you can see the codependence on each other. If they are both being measured by the same KPIs, and oftentimes this needs to be outtakes and outcomes, not the typical KPIs that we often see now that these organizations are being measured by, which are actually quite tactical. Transparency and a democratic access to information. I alluded to this early on, where oftentimes marketing does hold some of the information that communications needs, but more and more, because of the importance of executive communications driving a company's narrative and oftentimes driving the brand, communications is the one that sometimes actually is closer to the narrative and the corporate positioning. So it's up to both of them to be transparent and democratic about sharing the information. And that can only happen if they both have equal access to the senior decision makers in a company. This is another area where I think is a lost opportunity. I don't know one communications person or one marketing person who says, hey, I have all the budget in the world that I need, I'm fine. They're usually always looking for more money or to build efficiency into their programs. And I see a lot of duplication and overlap and wasted dollars when there aren't joint operational resources like shared calendars. Everybody knows the big milestones of the company. They're all working towards the same momentum. Joint meetings. This all sounds very tactical, but you can't believe how many companies do not bring comms and marketing together in the same meeting to really sort of put together joint programs and plans. Shared resources is a big area because this is where a lot of money is being spent, whether it's audience persona research, market research, competitive analysis, whether it's analyst resources or tools. These are things that both marketing and communications need. They get different things out of it, but they can share those resources and therefore share the costs, which means they have more money to do the things that they really want to do. To beat a dead horse, lead with brand first, share those audience identification, persona work, as well as stakeholder work. It's going to help everybody develop programs that are more on target. The executive comms-led organizations perform better because there is clear vision from the top. I think we all have seen many examples when a strong leader has a very compelling narrative as the core of what drives both external communications and internal communications. That gives a great roadmap for both marketing and communications. And I would say this is becoming more and more important all the time. Our team just did a webinar a week or so ago. Apologies for the dog. A week or so ago, and there was so many questions about the importance of executive communications in relation to building and maintaining a brand, protecting a brand from crisis that can pop up every day, and connecting messages to people to deliver those. Use umbrella messaging to tie both product content, excuse me, that marketing uses as well as corporate communications content. By tying those two things together, again, much more successful programs. Use the same messaging for your thought leadership, your news events, for content development. There is so much information out there that the worst thing that companies can do is confuse their audience by having too many messages coming out from an organization. And when you don't have a marketing and comms department aligned, oftentimes that happens. And then, this integrated plans for campaigns, events, even communities, the importance of the rising importance of communities, whether it's communities developed by publications, communities built around specific interests. That's where a lot of influence is happening. Having both a marketing and a communications view on those things will only mean that companies get more out of their participation. That is sort of the nut of how you can get from here to there. I'm happy to answer any questions. And Steve, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Great insights. Thanks for some of those. The first question that I've got is, what's your dog called, actually?
I have two. Thankfully, the puppy is not barking. Lucy.
Okay. Well, Lucy, I think Lucy found your presentation interesting as well. It struck me, this concept of tug of war or blissful coexistence. Maybe it's a question for the audience, actually. How would you describe the relationship of comms or PR versus marketing in your organization or the clients that you represent? Would you describe that relationship as dating, or as a marriage, or as a separation? Interested in your views. But please do use that Q&A box. There's a few questions coming in now. It would be great to have more that I can pose to Barbara. We have about 10-15 minutes left, and we will honour, obviously, everyone's time on that. Here's the first one coming in. Barbara, you talked about what a great union looks like. You mentioned size does matter, but the great union is equal seats at the table for the CMO and the CCO, shared KPIs, shared calendars, shared resources. Are the marketing and comms functions, in fact, not one and the same? Or should communications be a subset of the overall marketing goal? What's your views in terms of optimum? Maybe it's company size related, of course, but is it optimum to have two seats at the exec table, or in fact one? And what do you see as the directional trend, maybe 3-5 years from now, as to how that might evolve?
Yeah, because I've been doing this such a long time, it's been actually cyclical. You actually see it sort of changing every 5 to 6 years because of the importance of brand that I've talked about, and the research showing that there's two big points that research shows is that people will buy based on recommendations of people that they know. That's one of the reasons why shared and social media has become so powerful. And also these communities that I mentioned, that's where a lot of that information is shared. The other big trend is that people want to only buy from brands that they respect. And so this idea of separating the goal of getting people to buy your product and getting people to like your company is the same thing. One cannot be done without the other. And you just have to look back, like I mentioned, let's just look back at the last 10 months. Early on, research showed, there was lots of surveying done about how COVID was impacting customers and business in general. And one of the key findings that came out of that is that how brands dealt with their customers and their employees, especially their employees, through COVID would have a lasting impact on how people saw their brand. So the companies were watched very closely about, immediately laying people off and what they were doing to help support the mental wellness of their staff. When I think about how the work pivoted for us, a lot more internal communications focus from the C-suite took place during the beginning of COVID. And so I would say those two big trends are kind of what's driving the need for this equal seat at the table. I do believe the disciplines are different enough and important enough that you do need an equal seat at the table, and that communications has a role in the C-suite. I think you'll talk again, I'm going to go back to what's been happening the last 10 months. I would say communications has done quite well in the last, and agencies in specifically, and the role of comms people internally have just risen up. And it's because they could react quickly, they were agile, they had their finger on the pulse of what was happening in the marketplace. And because they were pretty much focused on brand, employee branding became a lot more important. Again, making sure that brands were looking out after their employees and their staff and doing the right thing. So I do think there's more today than ever that the C-suite sees the value of communications having a role at that level.
Great. I mean, another question coming in, thanks, Barbara, was, and you actually touched on this in your presentation around the importance of where you've got a strong executive comms-led person, that those organizations tend to perform better as there's a clear vision from the top that does align the whole organization. But have you got any tips in your experience? What happens if you have a CEO who is a bit media shy, or who doesn't like communicating, maybe very, very highly performing on many other areas, but how, as a PR professional or indeed a marketing professional, have you got any tips for the audience?
Yeah, let me talk about that a minute. There was one point, though, I'm sorry, Steve, to go back to your last question that I did want to mention, and that is oftentimes when you see, we have clients where the chief communications officer actually does report to the chief marketing officer rather than having an equal seat at the table. Oftentimes, those organizations, their CMO is very product-led, very not so much brand-led, but this is a product marketing person. And they really don't understand communications very well. And so it's not necessarily politics at that point. It's really just a lack of understanding. And there are many organizations, you either have a product-led CMO or a brand-led CMO. And I think it's more important in those product-led CMOs that the communications has an equal seat at the table. Okay, back to your last question.
Yeah, well, I guess just on that point, sorry to interrupt, I guess the diversity and getting the optimum mix is the answer there, right? In terms of having that right balance. But have you got any, in your experience, if you have a sort of a single executive role to cover both communications and marketing, have you ever seen any data or got any experiences to really which is the higher performing? Is it one that is more communications led and understands the value of the brand and the impact of managing the reputation with the audience? Or is it one who's got a more stronger product drive? Or are you going to say it depends?
Yeah, I guess I would say, I think smaller organizations probably are PR led because it's early on, they need to create that buzz. And again, I've worked with a lot of startups, spending most of my career in Silicon Valley. And so they tend to go with PR first. But I would sort of be disagreeing with my own hypothesis about comms and marketing needing an equal place at the table if I picked one or the other. That is the whole point. I do think they're different enough and important enough. And when they work together well, that's when you see really amazing
great. All right.
sustainable brands being built.
That makes a lot of sense. So sorry, I've got about 30 questions coming in, so we might turn it to rapid fire in a minute, but I'll give you a chance. Just, have you got any tips on how to handle a media shy CEO?
Yeah, this happens to us all the time, mainly because in the tech industry, oftentimes the CEO comes from an engineering background. So I would say the best scenario, first of all, there is a myth that you have to be a Mark Benioff or a Richard Branson, where you have to have a big, bold personality, and that's not true. There are CEOs who make, who've made a huge impact on the world, Bill Gates, for example, who are quite introverted and do best when they come across authentically as themselves. So that's a lot of what we do is when a media shy or shy spokesperson helps develop the content and is really a believer in what they're saying, oftentimes you can get over them being shy or being afraid to speak because it authentically comes from them. And that's again why I think executive comms led situations even work better for those types of CEOs, because they don't get tripped up because they're practicing a speech that somebody else wrote for them or they weren't invested. So to first get to know that CEO and to tie some things about their personal life and their philosophy to the company is a good place to start, because they can speak to that authentically. And once they do that a few times, they actually get over that fear. We also have CEOs, and there are a lot of CEOs that are operationally focused. And so they're just not that interesting, quite honestly. They don't know how to tell a story. So they're not interesting spokespeople. And they know that, which is why they shy away from that. It doesn't always have to be the CEO. It is actually better, and the expectation is the CEO, but it doesn't always have to be. We are spending more and more time doing thought leadership platforms and training for a broad C-suite. And so I think you can, if you really have a CEO who isn't going to step up in that way, find someone else in the C-suite to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Let's flick to a few questions here. Alex Hankinson has asked, here's a good one. What advice do you have when there's a marketing department internally using a PR agency externally, which obviously gives that immediate distinction between the two groups? How do you best get that alignment and amplification of message rather than the opposite?
Well, it depends in every situation. If the marketing department is led, and this is actually quite common, and we see this sometimes with even very large organizations, because Hotwire is a global brand, we oftentimes work with for example, the UK or European offices of a US brand. And oftentimes our main client contact is a marketing person. They do not have a PR person within region. So this is something we deal with quite a bit. Sometimes you have marketing people that have no idea about PR, and your job is to help them understand an area that's going to either make them look bad in their job or make them look really good in their job. So I think that's where you need trusted advisor role with those marketing people. And I think you also need from the very beginning to establish a relationship with the senior executives within an organization. This is a challenge if you're on the agency side that comes up a lot. There is what I will call gatekeeping sometimes, where the internal marketing person doesn't really know how best to communicate the value of comms, and yet they will not let the agency have direct contact with their executives. And I would say that's a losing proposition for both the agency and the internal marketing person. So we work really hard to basically demonstrate why it's in their best interest for us to have a relationship at the most senior levels of an organization.
It does help avoid that Chinese whisper sort of syndrome where the message gets misinterpreted. I think you touched on the points. Actually, Andrew Brown asked the question, to what extent should marketeers be trained in PR and comms and vice versa, and comms trained in marketing? I mean, you obviously see that as valuable, right?
See it incredibly valuable. I sometimes speak to student groups, and that's one of the things that I say, not only that I think they'll each do a better job going into, entering whatever field they enter, but I also think it's better for their career path. They'll have a lot more choices. We talk about that in my own organization. We do lots of training at Hotwire for a couple reasons. One, helping people get from one level to the next, so sort of going up the comms path, but also this matrix training around different skill sets. We hire digital marketers today. We hire insights and analytics people today, creative people, all within what is known as a communications organization or an integrated communications organization. So I would say, early on, the more you know about both disciplines, the more, I think, the more successful career you have, and I think you'll be better at what you do.
Slightly different question coming in here around how would you rank the different, I guess in terms of value to the business, but rank the value of different assets that between the comms and marketing functions they have at their disposal in terms of importance. Do you have a view? So sort of paid media versus earned media versus owned media versus social outreach. Do you have a pecking order typically in your mind that you see as consistently higher ROI?
Every company is different. It really is. It has a lot to do with budget. It has to do with the relevance of a company's message. It has to do with whether or not they have a strong spokesperson or not. What most people do realize now is the combination of earned and paid is really important. Where the credibility of an earned message, story, buzz, momentum, that credibility really matters, but you may not get the eyeballs on that unless you put some paid behind it. And so it is really that intersection. That's why integrated communications is the focus of a lot of, marketing spend. I would say, one of the areas that is marketing has focused on, and PR is being asked to do more and more, is account-based marketing, which is taking a lot of the disciplines of both marketing and comms and narrow focusing it on individuals or companies or an industry. That's another area where they're starting to see overlap.
Absolutely. In fact, Susan, we call it
paid and earned. And I would put social in there.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned account-based marketing. I was just going to say we call it account-based everything, actually, here at Cision in terms of our marketing focus. There's lots of questions as a general theme from, I guess, some of the either younger members of the audience or people earlier in their careers sort of wanting to pick your brains and advice, who they may be perhaps marketing communications generalists early on in their career. Have you got any advice or thoughts around or recommendations around specializing in one direction or another?
Yeah. So I'll look at my own career. I started out in marketing and marketing communications, as I mentioned. And because I worked at a smaller company, I guess my best advice would be either join a small company where you have to wear many hats. That's how I learned so much early on, working at a startup where you have maybe 2 marketing people in the whole and no PR people in the whole organization. You actually had to do everything. I would also put a plug in for taking an agency job. The difference between taking an agency job and a corporate job, an in-house job in the beginning of your career is, I think you learn much faster on the agency side because you actually have to do a lot of the stuff, not just manage it, but do. And you also see a wider variety of, challenges, companies, industries, and things like that. I do think clients, when you're on the agency side, clients want to know that they're working with experts. So specializing is important, but I would say, specializing with a healthy dose of context and knowing when to bring in other experts and specialists. Also be in an organization that will allow you to change your mind. This idea of matrixing, more and more people in the agency side of the business aren't looking at just moving up the ladder. They do want to expand out and add skill sets to their abilities and their experience. And so make sure if that's of interest to you, that you join an organization that gives you flexibility to do that.
Wonderful. I think we've got time just to squeeze in one last question, Barbara, and this will be the last one. As there's quite a few comments around the importance of data and analytics-driven KPIs, and that marketing often have historically found it a little easier to come up with tangible KPIs that perhaps execs understand more so than the PR and the communications teams. I mean, have you got any, in your experience, are there any sort of key KPIs that can quickly be aligned on for communications professionals to use? And what's your view on that sort of emerging trend for data and analytics?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to this vaguely, which is once you have a shared vision and shared goals, look at the expected outcomes, both for marketing and for comms. And if you look at, there's very tactical things like share a voice, number of clips, things like that. Quite honestly, I think that's boring. It doesn't tell a story. I think it's really more about, there is something about awareness, right? So you do want to measure things that, the more you are aware about a company, the more likely you are to try. And when you have a positive experience with that, once you've tried it, the more likely you are to buy. So we like to look at the sales funnel and look at specific metrics that drive the top of the funnel. So it is about visits to the website, number of leads coming in, but it's also more qualitative about what messages are resonating with clients and customers. Obviously, revenue. Like I said, whether you're in PR or marketing, your job is to help a company sell things, period. And so sales needs to be heading in the right direction, and that should be a shared responsibility between marketing and communications. For companies who can afford brand research, very tangible. I mentioned my friend Edgar. They actually have a methodology for measuring the value of a brand. So seeing benchmarking and seeing where, by surveying the audience and the market, where the brand stands and where it, how it grows or improves over time. Those are just a few. Examples of shared KPIs.
Fantastic. Well, Barbara, we have run out of time, but thank you so much for sharing some of your insights. I wrote down that line. It's your role to help companies sell things, period. I guess that's ultimately the unifying aspect of anyone in business, but certainly those involved in communicating and amplifying messages to the audiences and to their customers. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to answer all the questions that have been coming in, but it's been great having you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
So that's a wrap. It's been a great pleasure to host CommsCon this year. I hope you've all enjoyed the day and you've been able to take a few nuggets of insights that you can turn into action along the way. Thank you very much to all of today's speakers. Thank you very much to the Cision team for organising as well. And thank you, Polly, for emceeing. Polly, how are you actually doing? Are you keeping up?
Yeah, just about. It's been a long day sat in one place. It would be lovely to be all in person and kind of moving from place to place. But yeah, my bum's a bit numb sitting in one place all day. But hopefully next year we'll all be back together in the same room. It's been a really brilliant day. And one final note from me, if you've missed any sessions or want to rewatch anything, share them with your colleagues, please do keep an eye out for the recordings. They will be hosted on our website from next week. We will also be sending out some follow-up emails. Finally, a big thank you to everyone for joining from Cision. From us at Cision. Remember, Cision are here to help you amplify your story and measure the business impact. And if you want to have a chat with us, please feel free to book a demo or meeting. Thank you so much for participating and have a great evening. Goodbye. Thank you.